Before we start, I want to thank our sponsor, Kyndryl, who runs and reimagines the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find Kyndryl and the Kyndryl Institute at kyndryl.com. For most existing companies, over 90% of the organization's resources, people, energy, and management attention are focused on producing, delivering, and improving today's products. This chapter and today's episode reviews some of the political challenges associated with getting breakthrough innovations that move the firm into new white space accepted for development, and describes how serial innovators influence their organization to move these types of innovations into the development pipeline. Breakthrough innovations compete with current product lines for resources and attention, making them politically difficult to undertake. Our guest today calls it the Galileo scenario. The serial innovator looks at the same data as everyone else, but sees something totally different. It's a joy to go deep diving into this book. We were supposed to be actually on his new book, but we're still on this first book because there's so much into it. It's the book Serial Innovators, and the author once again is with us, Bruce Vojak. Welcome back to the show.
Aidan, it's all my pleasure, truly.
It's great to have you back, man. I'm loving this book, as you know. I keep sending Bruce notes and little cartoons and loads of little ideas that I come across the whole time. This chapter is probably one of the biggest strains and difficulties in being an innovator in a big corporation, because initially, if you're naive, you think it's about ideas, you think the idea is strong enough, you think there's an onus on the organization to accept your ideas, and you pretty soon learn that it's not the case at all. This is like entering into the maze full of minotaurs and medusas, snakes in the grass, snakes in the trees. It's a very difficult act, and we're going to go deep dive into this. Maybe you'll give us a bit of context to this chapter, because you've experienced it yourself, Bruce. We all have. Anybody who has a good idea, it's very difficult to get it through to production.
Yeah, it really is. And there's a story that I wanted to tell at some point today, but I think I'm going to start with it because I think it'll illustrate aspects of it. And this goes back to one of the innovators that we interviewed in the process of conducting the research, Nancy Dawes. She was at Procter & Gamble her entire career, chemical engineer by education. She had worked on things like chocolate chip cookies and Pringles potato chips. And then at one point was assigned to work on the Olay product and was really responsible for taking Olay from a really dying brand to $1 billion brand for the company. But the story I want to tell about her, I could come at this multiple ways, but she had come to campus a number of years ago to give a talk. Ray Price had invited her, and she was visiting us. And so she and I just had lunch, and we were talking. And at that time, I was beginning to explore how innovators know what to do. And this is a whole separate discussion we may have someday. Because I've really been curious about how the best innovators know what direction to head in. And so I asked her over lunch, I said, Nancy, tell me, how did you know what to do? And she's looking down, she's eating, and she says, I see dead people. Okay. Now, I had not seen the movie The Sixth Sense. And I'm like, who is this woman? I knew her, but I thought, where is this coming from? And she went on to explain, and she said, I see patterns that other people don't see. And it's not to make this mysterious or too far out there anyway. But she saw patterns as like being able to forecast the weather or anything else. She sees trends and patterns other people that just don't see, or she sees them sooner than other people do. And she said at first, early in her career, she didn't realize that. And then there was a point at which she began to realize, no, wait, I'm seeing things. And this is real. I'm not just seeing things differently. I'm seeing things differently that are good things to see. And then she realized that the onus was on her to help people understand that and to help people see those patterns. And so what started out as a simple question and a quick answer I'm going to tell you, we probably talked for 15 or 20 minutes about how she progressed in her career of not realizing that to realizing it, and then what in the best sense, what her burden was to carry in the organization. And we had different stories from different people throughout the research, but that one to me just encapsulates a reflection of what this looks like. And it's powerful because this discussion of navigating the organization, navigating the politics of the organization, is what truly sets apart an inventor from an innovator. There are other things, but in particular, it's not just creating an idea, it's helping move the organization forward.
Bruce, we're going to go through a diagram that you thought was in the book. There's parts of it in the book, by the way, but we have a diagram. We're going to go through that, but I'd love us to build up towards it because there's a lot of context that jump into the diagram too early we'll lose. And I'll fill in some little pieces and dots that have connected across previous episodes as well. One of them was talking to Chuck House, who's featured in the book. Chuck House, we did a 4-part series with Chuck about the permission denied book, the odyssey of being an entrepreneur inside an organization. But one of the things that I was saying to Chuck, and I've come to realize myself, was exactly to your point and to Nancy's point, that thing about seeing things differently means that when you get frustrated in an organization and you're talking to them, you're kind of going, like, why can't they see it? They're dinosaurs, they're idiots, this kind of thing that we all go through and you grow out of that pretty quickly. If you don't grow out of it, you're pretty much screwed. But you grow out of it and you realize actually they just don't have the lenses. And oftentimes what I find with many innovators and the people listening to this show is you will take time to listen to an episode like this. You will take time to listen all the way through. So many people write into the show and go, I listen over and over to the same episodes because I get something different every time. I know that now. And actually, the library behind me, in the early days, I don't think I would have been able to read your book as well as I can today. It's like I've graduated. I've earned the lenses. And when you talk to most people inside organizations, and why I opened up with that little quote is, they're so focused on exploiting the current advantage, or they're measured on it, or they're recognized on it, that why would they ever deviate from that path? And why would they go to conferences? Why would they read books? Why would they read periodicals about or talk to customers, except to see if they're happy with their current products? And actually, in there is the problem.
I'm just sitting here cheering you on as I'm hearing you talk about this. And, it reminds me too of something we spoke about last week. I don't mean to I don't mean to bring him up too often, but Ian McGilchrist, the two sides of the brain, the master and the emissary. And I think that's going on here a lot. And I think the people who in particular are very process oriented, I don't want to criticize that. It's a very important role. I'm not saying you should eliminate that, but the ones who are so process oriented very often just can't even begin to imagine what this other view is. And then how do you navigate that? And it is just not easy sometimes.
One of the first things, when I work with an organization, I do a workshop and they're quite surprised because the first thing is getting them on the same page and exposing the gaps in what they think they're talking about the same thing and they're totally talking about something totally different. And it's a real realization where they're going, and you talk about the concept of coherence. And essentially that's what you're trying to create, some type of alignment or coherence. This is a term that you adopt in the book and you bring to life a little bit. Maybe we'll explain that.
There's, I'll take a little bit of a step back. There is a need to have what I'll say different types of coherence in an organization. And these in hindsight may seem pretty obvious, but I like being explicit about it. There's a need for strategic coherence and tactical coherence. And strategic coherence to me means, are we going to even invest in innovation? And tactical coherence is, will we invest in this particular innovation concept. And really, it's the first question to ask, is your company even strategically open to considering these things? Because if it's not, you're really pushing a boulder up a hill. If it is, at least if it says it is, then it's more, how do I get my idea through the organization and run the gauntlet, if you will? And what we'll talk about today is in this idea of navigating the politics of innovation, it's how do you run that tactical gauntlet? How do you help people understand? And how do you bring the organization along? I'm going to quickly add two before we get too far into this, and this goes back to being on the same page. I don't want to say we get pushback, but some people, when they hear the word politics, they tense up. And it sounds very self-serving. And our intent when we talked about the politics of the organization, we really are talking about how do you get that coherence? How do you get that alignment? And how do you bring people along, if you will? It's not meant to be a self-serving form of politics, which can often be understood that way. It's really a servant view of it, if you will.
That certainly comes across in the people you've interviewed as well. I thought I'd maybe explain this as well, because I think when you get this is a paragraph in the book, when you get this concept, you realize that it's not stupidity. It's actually expertise that sometimes gets in the way. So you write in the book, breakthrough innovations may be politically difficult for the firm to accept because they raise questions about strategy in general. What is the product strategy in the short term, in the long term? How does the proposed breakthrough innovation fit into the current strategy? Does it change the strategy? And if so, is this new direction one in which the firm should move? And answering those questions often challenges senior executives and requires significant discussion, debate, and political maneuvering across the organizations. So that's an important thing. And I was telling you off air before we started, I've written an accompanying article for today's episode called The QWERTY Conundrum. And the whole idea is that the keyboard most people have in front of them was developed for a typewriter, and it was developed to slow people down so they wouldn't get carpal tunnel syndrome. And also the keys wouldn't jam. So it's actually inefficient. But then it comes along the Vojak keyboard, this new keyboard that was designed to actually be more efficient, 30% more typing speed, etc. And if you think about, we still have QWERTY keyboards. We've progressed to keyboards. We've progressed then to another paradigm, which is a phone, and we still have QWERTY keyboards. And it's everybody's designed around that system of that's how you write and how you go about your writing. And to actually have to retrain and untrain and unlearn is a huge expense, a switching cost for people. And I use that as this kind of way. That's what happens in outside organizations. They're very good at what they do. And along comes the serial innovator like Tom Osborne and goes, yeah, I know we just launched that product a month ago, but we could do a much better job. And everybody's like, shut up, we're making progress. And I love it that, because that, I think when you get that, you go, oh, now I get it. Now I know the task is what's ahead of me. And I know how difficult this political maze is going to be.
I often talk about it as being both an option for future growth, which I think a lot of us understand, but also an insurance policy. And you think of Tom's story where he had this really a reconsideration or rethinking of what a feminine hygiene product should be. If they didn't do that and one of their major competitors did that, it's an insurance policy. You have to, so it's not only growth, it's keeping from getting knocked off the pedestal. And it's both. And that's also why, again, I think in any size company, a small investment is often sufficient to at least get these questions on the table, because they really are strategic questions. And you need people who are able and willing to put these questions on the table. And it's not an easy thing to do.
I think it's important, and you do call this out, you say serial innovators start to distinguish themselves from typical inventors when they realize that in order to develop breakthrough innovations, they must learn how to manage the political processes of the firm. Politics, this is what you're talking about, loses its negative connotation as they come to value it as a necessary mechanism for accomplishing what they want to get done. That's a very key point, and something that many innovators or many people who take the head of innovation role don't know going into the role. But it's a huge choice because it means that it's not as easy. It's not beanbags and foosball tables and post-it notes. It is a much different role. And many serial innovators or many wannabe serial innovators don't know that, go into the role and feel like they've failed. But it's one of the reasons I didn't know that before I went into a big organization, very toxic organization. And you can feel totally like you're drowning. And I think it's really important to call this aspect out.
I may have mentioned this in the last session, but there's two quick concepts that I like to repeat when I think about things like this. One is, it was a question that we heard from one of the people we interviewed. When they hire people, they want people who want to do the work that innovators do, not be an innovator. And to me, it applies in a lot of places, but the politics in particular is just so critical that you have to be able to do that. And I think it's a challenge. It's a filter for so many people. I don't want to say it's 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 that do this, but it's not everybody. In a large organization, it's still, I think, easy to hide at times. And people can have long careers, doing, I don't want to say inconsequential work, but doing consequential work, but not have the same level of impact if they hadn't taken it on. The other thing I'll say, and again, I may have mentioned this last time, is that most of the people that we interviewed, and it was by default from the sample that we worked with, had at least an engineering undergraduate degree. In fact, a large number of them did. Most did not have graduate degrees, and just by chance, it wasn't planned that way. But they also mostly had engineering personalities. And as I think I may have mentioned, that you could tell an engineer is an extrovert because they're looking at your shoes, not their own. And so this is painful for a lot of the people that we interviewed because it's just not part of their personality to do this. And then this goes back to what you were talking about earlier. If the organization is open to dealing with data and facts, it actually makes it a little bit easier for some engineers to navigate that because, okay, I'm used to getting data. I'm used to collecting facts. I'm used to saying, here's the data. The data speaks for itself. And that makes it, I don't want to say it's easy, but it makes it easier to raise these things if the organization has that virtue of really dealing with reality rather than preferences.
And we'll come back to some of that because you do talk about that later in the book and tactics to share data as well and to get the data into the company, not through you because they might not listen to you. But one of the places I thought we'd start is this is so true. I've seen this time and time again when I work with heads of innovation. You say, and this is talking about early career actions that build trust and networks through competence. So you say in the book, innovators emerge sometime between 5 and 15 years into their career, depending on the organization's culture, structure, and size. And often they have an early win, and the early win gives them credibility or trust, and then they build on that later on.
Yeah, early wins. I actually had this email exchange with someone on a totally different area recently. Being reliable in the sense that they say what they're going to do and they do what they say. I don't want to get on a soapbox, but that's not always common. And so people begin to just naturally trust them. They're open about things. They're honest about these things. They show some level of, I used this word earlier, empathy, but they're people that, this is probably the negative, stating in the negative, they're people that not only you don't have to fear, but that you turn to because they are so reliable and they are dealing with facts and reality. And I think sometimes it makes it easier if you are, again, an engineer in a company that is at least maybe not a high-tech company, but at least technically inclined, companies that are based on technologies, to navigate those organizations. I think it can be more difficult if it's strictly marketing or strictly something where it's not as crisp of an understanding of what performance looks like.
I was thinking about this idea of trust is really important. And it made me think of Joe Bauer's work. So the whole idea of the resource allocation process. And he talked about that it wasn't an idea meritocracy inside organizations. It was basically middle managers who decided on where the budget would be spent. So if they trusted you and you had a win for them before, you made them look good. So the idea comes along and goes, whose idea is it? And they go, it's Vojak in Sector 7G. And you go, oh, Vojak, yeah, he's good. He's good for it. Give him the money. And I thought about that so much for this part of the project. And you can be very unlucky because you could try the project and the conditions were wrong and it failed because of that, not because of you.
Yeah. And again, we didn't sample on this, but anecdotally, I've known people in organizations that become bitter because of these things. And I got to tell you, I understand it. I understand how that can happen. And through no fault of themselves. It's just the way things play out. And then, how do they use what skills and capabilities they have to still move the organization forward? It can be difficult for some people.
So let's move into the naive view of how things get done in the organization.
Again, I think I'm probably overstating the engineering side, but I think it's important here to use this as an illustration. Being an engineer by training, and I say by personality, you're taught, what are you taught in school? You're taught to solve, you're given a problem. That's the first challenge. You're given a problem and you solve it. And over the course of roughly 4 years, you get really good at solving problems that are given to you. And once you solve that problem, you're done. It gets graded and that's the end of it. And so you go into the workforce and what do you think? I'm given a problem. Let's go back to the hourglass even for a minute. I'm given a problem. I solve the problem. I get a grade and let's go on to the next one. And so you have this view very often, it's almost ingrained or trained into you to say, I've done my technical work. I've solved this problem that you've given me. I've given you an answer. Okay, management, ball's in your court. I'm done. I've fulfilled my obligation to the organization. It's not only your responsibility to recognize this as a good idea, it's your responsibility to carry it forward. And I get that. Because again, we're taught, if you will, almost to be this way. At least conditioned to be this way. And so even when people are developing this trust in their network, they're often still not getting to the point where they're assuming that next level of responsibility, and taking that next step is just significant. I don't know how else to say it. It's significant. And it's really one of the big distinguishers. If you can be the person who's most curious, most insightful, most visionary, but until you take that ownership and responsibility. And so we, at the time, used this phrase and it's stuck. I think it's a pretty good metaphor. They cross the bridge and they take responsibility. They take ownership. One guy that we interviewed, it was a marvelous story. And I think I'm going to get this right. His mother was a piano teacher and his father was a car salesman. And this guy was just really good. And I think he must have picked this up just being in the household that he was in. But he learned how to advocate for things very comfortably. There was nothing false about it, nothing inappropriate. And what a marvelous set of backgrounds that led him to be able to say, yeah, okay, I got to sell these ideas. And not everybody was like that it came so comfortably. But when you see that and you see the people take that responsibility, it's a beautiful thing. And it's a filter. I don't know how else to say it. It's a filter. And I'm going to quickly add here two stories. Two short stories. One is, Ray and I were visiting a company and we were talking to, I think it was VP level, at least a VP level, if not a more senior VP. And he was expressing his frustration that he couldn't get people to be motivated to do things. And we're realizing, this is tying back to even this MP5 model, if people aren't motivated to do these things on their own, it's really hard to get them to cross the bridge.
Yeah, the motivation actually is huge. And again, I'm so interested about how people are formed inside an organization. I actually think one of the reasons I'm a bit of a weirdo is because I had a career in sport first. And I actually came to the working world quite late, as in I was 31, 32. And I had the resilience that sports gives you, and also maturity. So if you come inside an organization, I was thinking about this, you come to an organization, my first experience, I'm sending ideas to to not leadership team, but to where I think the ideas should go. Don't even get a response. Don't even get an email back, right? So I'm the type of character who are like, how rude is that? And I'll push back and I'll try and find a way and I'll keep going. But this is how if you think of somebody's onboarded as a junior, they're learned that's the way things are around here. And then you learn, and these are the three things you call out, that invention is sufficient. That's number one. Number two, managers have the responsibility to recognize the value of the invention and to see that it is used effectively inside the organization too. Three, if an invention is sufficient for acceptance and the next steps are the responsibility of the manager, it's reasonable to conclude that nothing more is expected of the technologist or the ideate or the person who comes up with the ideas, and all responsibility for development and commercialization passes to someone else. And when you go through those steps as a junior person or you're hired into an organization, you then get formed that way and you go, that's the way we do things around here. I don't do ideas, I do execution. And you can see how an organization creates a culture by that. But the weirdos, the people who see the world differently, the people who see dead people, go, actually, it's all on me to do this. If I actually want to go and push these things through, I'm going to have to find a way to position the idea, find a coalition, find air cover, find customers who actually want this. And so it's a very unique type of person that survives that onboarding. And like you say, the son of the piano teacher and the used car salesman, I was picturing him there. Okay, I've bought 5 cars off my dad. I'm going to advocate for myself. I've used up all my pocket money. I got to do something about this. It's true. Something different in your upbringing or your education or your l'enfant terrible, you're the unhappy child, the kid who just is asking questions in school and being told to shut up by the teacher. There's something in there that creates you to be this type of person.
Well, I think there is. And we could spend an hour just talking about, is it nature or nurture? And I think some of these things, people are inclined to be this way. And I'll also say 2 things came to mind as you spoke. One is, we go back to the chart, the stage gate chart that we talked about last week, where there was inventor, champion, and implementer, and then the serial innovators cross those. This is clearly illustrating the inventor versus champion roles, and also to a certain extent the implementer. And we do operate in silos functionally, organization. They're designed that way. And you're right. I think it imposes on people something that is never really discussed, but it's the reality of the organizational structure. And yet, and this is one of the recurring minor themes that I like to raise, is that people who are serial innovators, they're doing innovation the way it would have been done before any of our books were written. They just say, there's a problem. I'm going to obsess about it. I think I'm seeing something. I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to try to make it happen. And to me, it's refreshing. It's almost liberating to say all these books are right because they are describing pieces of it. But at the end of the day, it's a very people view of how things work. And you have people who are motivated to do this. And I don't want to sound corny, but I think it's beautiful. Because these people just emerge in places and times that can be so impactful for an organization, for everybody.
Bruce, I was thinking about what you were saying, crossing the bridge, and I had created a cartoon of a bridge, and it was full of like ogres and like.
That was pretty good. That's better than I would have thought, but I like this.
But here's one of the ogres you quickly discover. So I often think of this one, I call it the Disneyland queue problem. So anyone who's been to Disneyland, you think you're at the top of the queue, and then it turns around the corner, you're like going, oh my God, we're only at the first corner here. And one of the things that happens as a serial innovator is you talk about this one serial innovator who described a conversation with his manager in which the manager said, you have me convinced. Now you need to help me convince the larger set of other people. And for virtually all breakthrough innovations, gaining acceptance for the project is a matter of convincing many people, not just one. And sometimes you think you're there and you think, yes, got it over the line. And next thing you go, no, there's another 10 people you have to get in here. And it's those little, you have to go through it to understand how gut-wrenching that is when it happens. But calling it out makes you at least be able to plan for it.
Or at least not be surprised by it. In fact, all those 10 other people, they probably have 20 different triggers that you need to address, 2 for each. And so it's customizing in many cases, especially for the more important ones, the ones managing resources. It's a wonder that these things even happen sometimes. And it's not surprising when they don't.
As we said earlier on, sometimes these ideas, they just escape from the organization. Or else, I'm sure you've seen it. I just go, you know what? I've had enough. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to get funding. I'm going to build this idea and I'm going to be a competitor. We've seen that time and time again. But I mentioned there the idea of snakes and ladders. Some of the ladders I thought we'd talk about. The first one, so these are the ones that are accelerate you. These are like when you're in Super Mario Kart and you get that coin that makes you go extra fast. So the first one is engaging people. So to get participation and buy-in, and I'll tee you up here, you say, serial innovators are asking colleagues for favors with only their trust and goodwill as their currency, as well as their contagious excitement about the idea. These are their bargaining tools. Allies are created one at a time by making direct requests and selling the potential for the project. That's a difficult thing as well, and something many serial innovators do naturally very, very well, but it's a slow process. And again, you think you've been hired as a head of innovation, you're going to be out of the blocks and start creating ideas. But it's this slow step-by-step process that you go through.
I'm going to quickly add, this is reminding me, have you ever heard of the children's book called Stone Soup?
Yeah, exactly.
What do they come to the party with? They got 3 stones and a big bucket in a pot of water or a fire. And yet they get people involved. And the best ones engage that way. The other thing that in my anticipating our conversation today, I wanted to point out, because I think it's a good place to do it, is that in engaging others, and I don't think we call it out explicitly in the book, the innovator themselves, and they may not be hired as the director of innovation. We're really talking about people in that organization for the most part. They attract these other people to the project. And this really calls into question, how do you structure an innovation project? And there is this tendency on executive management's part at times, not everybody, but a lot of them, to preform teams. I'm going to put, and I don't know enough about rugby, but I actually had a boss who was a Welsh rugby player, amateur player. So I heard a bit, but you have certain positions, and so you, if you will, recruit those positions. But is that always the best way to form a team when you don't even know exactly what you're doing? And so the people that emerged as innovators, they would bring people into the project, if you will. And I say bring them on, that sounds too formal. It doesn't really accurately describe it. They'd get people engaged as they needed to be engaged. Tom Osborne's story, he wanted to make, I don't know if it was sample 50 or 100 of these products to test them. He needed to get somebody in the lab to do him a favor. And the two of them worked side by side, building some of these samples by hand. It wasn't that anybody assigned that person. In fact, he was doing it under the radar at the time. And it's a different view of top-down organizational structure versus what I'll say almost inside out or an emergent behavior. And the pattern, man, I got to be careful saying this. Someday, like a year from now, after we've talked about this, I'll want to hear from you to say, how many times have you heard stories where the preformed innovation team actually created the breakthrough? And I almost feel bad saying this because I don't have data for it. But I'll tell you, every story we heard, it was not a preformed team. And I know of a lot of preformed teams, and I know a lot of people who are hired for innovation director positions, and I don't want to knock those. But you've got to ask yourself, are you looking for the people who can make this happen, or are you going to take ownership of that yourself? And if you're going to take ownership, you have to get it right. And I don't know if this is going to sound heretical or if you're seeing these patterns too, but again, a year from now, I'd like to hear from you to see if this is what you see too, or even now if you want.
There's a brilliant quote by Clayton Christensen. It's like, almost always disruptive innovations, I'm paraphrasing now, don't come from a single department or silo. They come from a mix of those departments or silos or people that have never met before. And it's the neurodiversity. And also we talked about coherence as an energy coherence before. I genuinely think it's an energy connection. It's people who want to do things, who are at the same kind of level of energy. They emit the same energy. They see the same things. They're on the same page. And that's very difficult when you're in the same team to do those kind of things. But one of the things I just wanted to call out on that is you say sometimes you get assigned a team. So I've seen this before. You get given people. Chuck talked about this. He ended up getting, and they weren't great people. They were dregs. People didn't want. People who had bad attitudes. And you talked about Frank, the heavy equipment serial innovator. We didn't talk about him. Maybe you'll give a better context on him. But he got his team to make a quilt. And he was assigned a team by management rather than hand selecting them. And you call out this, you say this can be difficult because in his case, it was even worse because it was a government body and they weren't accustomed to doing hard work.
Yeah, and this goes back to motivation. Because usually when you're recruiting people, there's a lowering of that energy barrier because, I kind of like what you're saying. I'm bought into that. And I'll make a few of these. I'll test this for you. But when you're assigned people, and that was, again, I keep using this phrase, that was a beautiful story too. In fact, I got to tell you, if we had only interviewed these people, we never wrote a book, it would have been a very enjoyable process. Yes. You lift the screen on how these things happen behind the scenes. But in that case, he had them each create a little part of a quilt. They put it together and they showed how the group operated as a whole. And he was looking to get people to be more part of the team. And I hear people I trust and respect talk about innovation as a team sport. I often ask them, what sport is it? Because think about it, different sports, different teams are formed in different ways. In American football, the quarterback, or American baseball, it's the pitcher, are the focus of these teams. Other teams, I think, are a bit more fluid and a bit more evenly spread. What kind of team is this? And is it preformed or is it formed, if you will, on the fly? And because I do not disagree with it being a team sport, but I think that metaphor carries with it a lot of preconceived thinking that we should at least understand.
Yeah, and the skills needed depend on the project that's in front of you. Speaking of which, you talk about positioning the project and that every product commercialized needs to fit into the strategic context and goals of the organization. And sometimes how the potential breakthrough product fits with the rest of the product lines or the company's existing strategy is not always obvious. So therefore, a political task for the innovator is to position the new breakthrough so that others can understand how it fits in the first place. Because if you don't do that, they're going to go, like, he's just coming up with crazy ideas or she's coming up with crazy ideas, and they'll dismiss it. I thought this one was really important to call out, that first you need to know a strategy before you can actually try and fit the other idea to it. And then the flip side, which I was telling you about Gary Klein's book, Gary we had on the show before, is Seeing What Others Don't. He talked about, well, sometimes you'll find a brilliant idea and there's no file for it. There's no filing cabinet to put that idea because it doesn't fit. But it's a brilliant idea, but it's not what we do around here. And that can be frustrating when you stumble upon those genius ideas.
It can. And as you're describing this, you're reminding me of a story that Nancy Dawes, who I mentioned earlier, shared. She was working on a project and she had some just really good insight. And she brought it forward to her immediate manager, and it really didn't fit in terms of timing. And this is where I'm not going to remember exactly if she fully set it aside, put the technology on the shelf, or if she continued to work on it a bit quietly, because most of the serial innovators could get their job done in, let's say, some fraction of the time required, and they would use the other time learning and developing other things. But I don't know if it was 6 or 8 months later, they came back to her and said, Nancy, remember that? And then the timing was right. And that's part of positioning too. It's, again, and I think it also is part of seeing things that other people don't see. She knew to anticipate this. And I don't want to say that all these people are superhuman because that's not fair to them. I don't want to overly idealize the stories, but the patterns were pretty unescapable that they saw these things. And that was part of the deftness of how they navigated it. It wasn't just, I've got an idea, I got to sell it, and they're out hammering people. Okay, we'll work with you.
Yeah, I want to remind our audience here, a great episode we did was on the Nokia series, which is still ongoing, that series, but it was with Timo Partanen. He was the guy, Bruce, who presented to senior management, head of market intelligence, the document about the iPhone a year before the iPhone graced the stage in California. And I was asking him just the little nuggets of stuff. And he said, one of them for me, one thing that came to mind was they were giving away a music subscription service for free as part of the Nokia deal. So you could download, back then it was download a physical software MP3 and you could add it to your phone. He said, we had Spotify, but we just didn't have any way to even think about Spotify as a service. We could have sold that. We could have created it. And this is where this all came together for me. If you don't have a lens or a filing cabinet, a mental filing cabinet to go, oh, that's a subscription service that works, that could actually be a product in the future. If you don't have that skill set or capability inside of an organization, you're missing ideas all the time. And I call the article Filing the Future Under the Past, because you revert to your existing mental filing cabinet and go,
yeah, by default. Yeah.
Almost always. Yeah. So I just thought that was, and that came to mind as I was reading this book, is that you wanted a strategic fit, but then you have that Nancy problem sometimes that you go, yeah, but this is a great idea. The technology mightn't exist yet, or we have too much going on at the moment. I need somewhere to store it.
Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, too much going on at the moment. I'm going to quickly add one of the most challenging questions that I've been asked whenever I've given talks is, can you have too many of these people? And my default is always no, you can't. And partly it's because they're so rare that is too many mean you've got 2 instead of 3, or two instead of 1, or 5 instead of 3. I don't know. But there probably is a point where you can have too many. But again, it's part of this. What's the organizational appetite for this even?
I agree you can have too many because you don't want too many dreamers.
But if they're just dreamers, you can have too many. That's the point. If they're just inventors and they become the curmudgeons in the corner, yeah, you can always have too many of them. But the serial innovators, can you have too many? I don't know. I don't know yet. I'm inclined to say no, but I'm thinking of really the exemplars at this point.
And you covered successful ones. There's somebody who didn't make it, the survivorship bias
Absolute
challenge. Yeah. A couple of little tips here that are really useful. So you talked about assembling support or creating data to support your idea. And one of the things, and we talked to Chuck House about this. One of the things he did was getting customers to accept the idea before the idea was accepted by the organization. And as you say in the book, one serial innovator said, the best marketing research is a signed purchase order. This is one of those underhanded tactics that you have to use sometimes. And I've done this kind of stuff, Bruce, and you feel a bit duplicitous doing this kind of thing, but it's like collateral damage for the greater good of the organization.
Yeah, if you're selling something that doesn't exist, I might have a problem with it. But if you're selling something that can exist, that really is a viable product concept, I think it's marvelous because it's a pull. It's a way to get management attention. And I think that question in general about, do you have a signed purchase order, someone willing to pay for it? I regularly still use that as a filter when I talk to people, because there are a lot of ideas out there, but they're not a lot of ideas that really stimulate someone to buy. I know I fall into this when I evaluate ideas. Oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then I think, am I going to spend the time to actually use this if I buy it? I don't know. That purchase decision is huge.
Just to be clear, I don't mean being duplicitous to the customer. I mean more
to the organization.
Yeah, you kind of...
And I didn't take it as you were being duplicitous to the customer. More to the organization.
Yeah. To the organization. You can feel, and it's a little bit like, man, this could get me in trouble. And there's a quote I love by Buckminster Fuller, and I lived by this quote: all human advances occur in the outlaw area. I love that quote because it speaks to this, because sometimes you have to break the rules. You're not doing anything, not breaking the law, but you have to break the rules. And there are times when the potential customer and organizational benefits of pushing a project outweigh the personal risks. And we saw this again with Chuck. Chuck said this, that he never even thought of that. He was so focused on doing what was right for the organization. He never thought that he could lose his job. And it was, as we saw in part one with Tom Osborne, he nearly lost his job three times.
Yeah. You mentioned Buckminster Fuller. I'm going to quickly, if you will, riff on that for a moment. You've heard the trim tab story? Yeah, Buckminster Fuller apparently identified as a trim tab. And again, I think I'm going to get this right. But basically, my understanding of a trim tab is that if you've got like an ocean-going ship, large ship, and it's got a rudder, you don't steer the rudder. You steer a little tab at the end of the rudder, and then that moves the rudder, and then that moves the ship. And so the serial innovators are a bit like that trim tab. And to me, I love that because it's one person can do a small thing, but that can turn a huge ocean liner. And in a way, it's the power of the people who know how to move an organization or move people that can move the organization.
I love that, man. That's going in the blog somewhere.
Well, look it up because that's another one I've searched. And I don't know if I found it on the ocean liner. That's the way I heard the story. But I know he identified as trim tab at times. It might even be as tombstone, his grave marker. I am trim tab.
It made me think of the gaff to scale. You want to tip the odds in your favor. Actually, tip the odds in the favor of the organization. That's ultimately what you're doing. This is the great tragedy of it. I found the quote by Chuck House, by the way. He said, I wasn't trying to be defiant, or I'm not going to be able to say this word because I've never even heard of it. Stressed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't try to be a jerk.
Yeah. I just wanted success for HP. It never occurred to me that it could cost me my job. That's the thing. You're like, I talked to you about this before, and I said it in that first episode. You're getting punished for doing the right thing. And that's actually the most hurtful thing. When you do get a slap on the wrist, you're going away kind of going, I actually care. And if you were to actually zoom out, you go, more than most people inside the organization, because I'm risking a lot to do what I think is the best thing for this organization. And I have to go out to the outlaw area, get customers to send in requests for this product, whatever, cajoling and trying to influence the trim tab. And it's a dangerous and lonely place.
But aren't these moving stories? when I hear what you just described, again, not to sound corny, my heart soars when I hear things like that. And to me, it goes back to be a very personal human endeavor that innovation is. We take it out of again, not that these processes are bad, but we take it out of the process and return it to the fact that it's a human, very personal act of discovery.
Absolutely. And the very listener to this show as well. Bruce, I thought we'd finish with the diagram. I'm going to share on the screen for those who have been joining us the whole time, this diagram, which is navigating organizational politics. And I'm just going to hand it over to you, Bruce, to take us through it.
Thank you. You start in the upper left, and this is this naive view. And I should quickly add, this combines elements of time evolution and also activity. So there's a lot going on in this chart, but it does combine a lot of things, I think, in one place. Almost everybody comes with this naive view. It's not my job, basically. And they get to the point where they realize if they want to have impact, as we've said, they cross the bridge and they accept and they're willing to try to influence people. So that's the first upper left to the second upper left sphere, moving from upper left to one sphere in. And once they accept that they're willing to influence, they'll apply just various influence techniques. They apply them flexibly. They use discernment when they apply them. So they might, as we've talked about, they engage other people, they position the project. They use what we refer to as hard and soft influence. And by hard and soft, we meant more quantitative versus qualitative, not hard in terms of clubbing people, but hard in terms of providing data, if you will. And they apply these as the situation dictates. And as they do that, this is how they build trust. They develop their network of people. They're very often seen widely in the organization. And by doing that, at the very top of this, you have the organization and you're moving the organization forward. And so it's this flow, if you will, of it's not my job I have to take ownership I'm going to learn and develop how to do this in a very appropriate way, organizationally appropriate way. I'm going to begin to develop more trust with others, and I'm going to move the organization forward. And it encapsulates all of this in one chart. As I said, I was embarrassed as I was going back through my notes. I'd used this chart for years. I thought this chart was this way in the book, and it's not one of the figures, but it combines aspects of two figures and then it adds to it as well. And someday I'll talk to Ray and Abby to find out why we didn't use this image, but that's a whole separate conversation.
Special, unique chart for the innovation show. I was comparing this one in my head to the previous chart that we did, and the other one goes down. Yeah. It's a birthing, as you said. This one's more of a transcendent.
It is. I like that. That's good. You're adding new visuals and thoughts to this, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bruce, so we're going to come back for part 3 of our fuller pieces. What are we going to discuss on part 3? What have we got for our audience?
Last time we talked about who are these people, how do we begin to understand who they are, how do they operate? Today we talked really entirely how these people navigate the organization, because in addition to their insight, it's one of the key differentiators of who they are and how they succeed. Next time, we're going to talk about it from a managerial perspective. And what I want to begin to, if you will, tease you and your listeners with is that the people who are doing this so much rely on executive management, and they rely on good executive management. And I'll probably mention this again next time. Sometimes it's more difficult to find somebody who knows how to manage these people than it is to find a serial innovator. And that's a pretty powerful statement. And we'll talk a bit about how to the best identify and develop the people. So this is, again, the complementary view of the innovator and their manager. We'll talk about how they identify and develop them and how they manage them for success. And I'll give you a little teaser too, that on the cover of the book, and Ray and I and I did not come up with this, but the cover of the book has a bunch of birds flying and one is a different color. One of the quotes we heard was, "The best managers let the birds fly." These self-motivated people. when we saw the cover, we're like, oh man, why didn't we think of that? And I got to hand it to the people at Stanford University Press for just grasping that and running with it. And so we'll talk about the manager's perspective. And what I want to leave you with today, and I want to come back to next time, is that if you're an innovator and you're listening to this and you want to be encouraged for what to look for, if you want your manager to listen to something, bring them to the next episode, because I think there's an additional audience that will benefit from that episode as well.
Fantastic. And I totally got the cover, by the way. I was going to ask you about the cover because one of the things you could have done with the cover is had the orange bird facing the different way from the bluebirds. And I was like, well, that's not the goal. The goal is actually to bring them with you. And that's what we discussed today in the Navigating Politics. Bruce, absolute pleasure. Author of Serial Innovators, Bruce Vojak, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Kyndryl, who run and reimagine the technology systems that drive advantage for the world's leading businesses. With a unique blend of AI-powered consulting built on unmatched managed service capability, Kyndryl helps leaders harness the power of technology for smarter decisions, faster innovation, and a lasting competitive edge. You can find out more about Kyndryl at KYNDRYL Kyndryl.com.